Okay, we'll do a Q&A at the end. Yeah, sorry, I just got to turn this off. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem. Okay. Are you going to, do you want to do an introduction, or are you happy to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome everybody who's online to this talk called The Strategic Edge, Neurodiversity in the Workplace. We're going to talk today about neurodiversity, what it is, what it's not. I'm going to focus primarily on 3 areas, and those 3 areas are dyslexia, ADHD, and autism. We're going to look at those from the perspective of what they look like, what they're not, how they impact you, and the way in which you can adapt to make sure that those things don't negatively affect your workspace. Today primarily is about education, motivation, and empowerment. So if you are dyslexic, ADHD, or autistic, I want to educate you about what they are. This is not a deep dive, but an overview really. I want to motivate you to help you to understand that you can change your mindset, your habits, and your ability to be productive so that you can deliver on what you have the potential to deliver on. And then I want to empower you with some ideas of what's going to allow you to mitigate the circumstances that come with dyslexia, ADHD, and autism. So, my name is Vic Williams. I have an MBA in economics. I'm an author, speaker, trainer, consultant, content creator, podcaster, and all sorts of other things. I also am dyslexic and have ADHD. So, let's firstly talk about the brain and the nervous system, because it's in the brain and the nervous system where dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and all the other neurodiverse conditions live. So the most researched brain and the easiest brain to research is labworms. And labworms typically have around 302 neurons in their brain. The reason why it's easy to research those is because it's a small number of neurons, and they are very similar to human neurons. And they make between them about 8,000 synaptic or neuron-to-neuron connections on an ongoing basis. However, the human brain has around 85 billion neurons, which on their own or collectively make about 100 trillion connections all the time, which means that the brain is a hugely complex thing. The human brain is a hugely complex thing to understand, to recognize its abilities, the things that it does, because of all these connections going on all the time. Come on, move along. Sorry, it won't click at the moment. There we go. So your brain has a number of structures in it. You've got the forebrain over there with its various components. The forebrain sits in the front mainly. Then you've got the midbrain area and the hindbrain structures. Now, we're not going to get into what all of them do, but this is just an overview of what the brain looks like and all the different components within it. This is just a neuron structure, which shows you how the neurons are set up. And the main parts that we are interested in talking about when it comes to dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, the main components to talk about are the axons, along with the myelin sheath, and then the dendrites. That's where the electrical current is communicated. And then the other part to talk about is the synaptic terminals, which are very key. And the reason why the synaptic terminals are key to talking about these things is that's where neurotransmitters bounce between the neurons and the neurotransmitters are highly engaged in dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, and their function in that space. Now, this isn't a science lesson, so I'm not going to get into huge detail. However, if any of you were online earlier while Rebecca and I were having a conversation, excuse me, we spoke quite a lot about dopamine and dopamine's impact on things like what happens in our brain when we constantly looking at our mobile phones, constantly wanting that instant feedback. And it causes many, many problems, particularly for people with ADHD. Part of what I'm going to talk about today is this idea of reframing your mindsets, reframing your habits, and then rebuilding you as an individual. And this is the context in which we want to look at these things from when it comes to the workplace. How do they impact the workplace? So for graduates, you're leaving university, or you may be staying in university, but later on down the road, you're going to go into the workplace. How does your dyslexia, ADHD, or autism affect the workplace? So for example, how does the different chemicals in your brain affect what you do and how you do it and how you respond to certain things? So we're going to look at those in a little bit of detail. So what is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity is the way in which your brain is structured and uses its ability to function normally, or to function within the world in which we are. It describes neurodiversity, the word particularly describes the community of people that have neurodiverse as opposed to neurotypical traits, abilities, skills, differences within their brains that affect everyday life. Neurotypical people are spoken about as those that have brains that function normally, and for me there's no real normal, but society has set specific norms that neurotypical people tend to follow. Our world, everything in our world is primarily created and set up for people with that neurotypical brain. The way in which we fill out documents, the way in which we run our mobile phones, the way in which we operate on the internet, the way in which we work in the university. All those things are set up for neurotypical brains because people with neurotypical brains are the majority, and it's set up that way for them to move easily through those environments, to navigate those environments. But it has a opposite effect on people who are neurodivergent. Hope all that makes sense. But neurodiversity includes all of these things: dyscalculia, dyslexia, ADHD, Tourette's syndrome, acquired neurodiversity. That's people who've had a forebrain injury or a TBI. They can acquire neurodiverse conditions. Mental health, ASD, ASC, sorry, dyspraxia, and all those different things fit into the neurodiverse space. As I said earlier, primarily what we're going to talk about is dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, because those form the biggest part of it. Yeah, just some terms that are important to understand when it comes to neurodiversity, definitions, and so on. Neurodiversity is natural diversity of the human brain. Neurodiverse paradigm is the philosophy behind that. Neurodiversity movement is this whole social justice environment that we move in, and so on. There's a whole bunch of things there that would tell you a little bit more about neurodiversity and what it's about. Right. So it's important to know that neurodiversity is an evolutionary, not a cultural condition. Our brains were established about, oh, sorry, I clicked forward. Our brains were established about 40,000 years ago. Whichever way you choose to look at it, that's when the brain was set as it is. It evolved to that stage. It stopped its evolution because we didn't need it to go any further. So what it has is what it has. Those neurodiverse conditions were evolutionarily designed for a purpose. And as I was saying to Rebecca earlier, 40,000 years ago, we did not live in cities, towns, or villages, but we lived in communities. And within those communities, each person had a particular function, had a role, had a thing that they needed to do, and their brain was set up to do that thing. For example, people with ADHD would primarily have been your witch doctors, your visionaries, those that saw where the community needed to go in the future. People who are dyslexic have that big picture thinking. Again, visionaries, people who understand where things need to go. So there's a particular evolutionary purpose to neurodiverse conditions. The reason why it's become a challenge in our day and age is purely because our world has changed from where it was all those many years ago. As I said, we're going to talk about dyslexia, ADHD, and autism primarily because these are the most common and most researched. Dyslexia is probably the most common neurodiverse condition, making up about 60% of all people who are neurodiverse are dyslexic. And then there's ADHD and autism. People with dyslexia, about 60% of people with dyslexia also have ADHD. And the confusion often comes in between ADHD and autism because their conditions look similar in many different ways, or in many ways. So let's talk about dyslexia. I'm just going to move this out of the way so that you can see that more. Okay, so let's just talk about dyslexia. As I said, the brain was established about 40,000 years ago. And 40,000 years ago, we did not read, write, or spell. We started doing that about 5,000 years ago. Mainly, I think the oldest written language goes back in the Chinese culture about 5,000 years ago. And they had come up with symbols which represent words. And if you look at language today, if you look at the written language, our writing is purely just a symbol that represents what we call a letter. And then we put a whole bunch of those symbols together to form a word. We put a whole lot of words together to form a sentence. So they are just symbols. Now, our brains were designed to recognize symbols, not letters, not words. So understanding that we can recognize symbols, our brain has a component within it, or three components within it, that are designed to recognize symbols and interpret symbols. So the brain has co-opted components of itself in order to be able to read letters. So your brain sees a J, for example, sees the symbol, not the letter, the symbol, goes into the memory and remembers when your teacher back when you were 7 years old said that shape is a J. Right, you see a J. And you put a whole lot of those symbols together and you have a word. The same comes with writing. Now we have to understand writing symbols. And then spelling became a thing. We had to learn how those symbols fitted together in an alphabet and how those symbols fitted together when we write words. So it's symbol recognition. Now, with a person who is neurotypical, It's a very short process to go from the eyes to those 3 areas in the brain that are primarily used for symbol recognition. Very short process. And so the process of seeing the symbol or seeing the letter, translating it into an understanding of what that is, and then being able to make up the word is pretty quick. With somebody with dyslexia, those 3 areas are slightly differently designed because they were not designed to recognize single symbols. They were designed to recognize symbols as a big picture. So, for example, that mountain over there, which you as a neurotypical person may just see, that's the mountain. The person with dyslexia would see that as a symbol, and they would see the symbols behind it. What's the rest of the process? And so it takes longer. Those areas were slightly differently designed in the brain when we got to that place of evolution, and they take longer to recognize those symbols, the smaller symbols, than we do to recognize the bigger symbols. And so that's why people with dyslexia tend to be slower readers, tend to be slower spellers, tend to struggle with writing because of the recognition pattern. It's an evolutionary process, and it's got a purpose behind it. Why that purpose? Who knows? Talk to evolution if you don't believe me. But that's the whole plan behind it. There is an evolutionary purpose behind it. Now, they started researching, or the first research, oh dear, I've lost my mouse here. Oh, there we go. The first research into dyslexia was done in about 1887. And at the time, they called it word blindness because they thought that people who we now recognize as dyslexic could not see the word, could not see the letter. And so they were blind to those things. And so they started telling people who had dyslexia to wear eyeglasses so they could see the letter. Didn't change anything. Then they kind of figured, well, it must be that there's a problem with the neurons in the eyes. They're not seeing the word, and therefore they can't translate it. Slowly, that understanding changed over time as research continued, and they discovered that it's actually a difference in the brain. So dyslexia is not just a challenge with spelling, with reading, with writing difficulties. Short-term memory is very poor generally for people with dyslexia. They find it difficult to find the right word. I mean, I was standing here just now. There was a word on the tip of my tongue. I just couldn't remember it. I couldn't bring it out. And so I had to use something else. Anxiety, anger, depression, all these things are high for people with dyslexia. However, on the opposite side, spatial awareness. Most people with dyslexia can walk into a room and understand the layout of the room, what could be changed, what could be done because of that spatial awareness. You find many pilots are dyslexic. They won't recognize it, or they won't admit it, but they're dyslexic because it actually helps them with spatial awareness when they're flying, particularly fighter pilots. And so a lot of people in those spaces understand these things. So creativity, reasoning skills, big picture thinking, interpersonal skills, thinking outside of the box. Somebody one day said to me that people with dyslexia don't just think outside the box, they don't even recognize the box. So if you have a look at people who are architects, for example, many architects are dyslexic because they've got that spatial awareness thing, they've got the creativity, and they've got that, well, this box doesn't exist, let's build it like this. And so that's why you see some of the amazing architecture around that comes from people who just think completely different to everybody else. Where somebody says it can't be done, they say it can. So Dyslexia, what is it not? And this is really important when it comes to the workplace. What dyslexia is not. Dyslexia is not a lack of motivation. I remember when I was at school, my teachers used to say to my parents, all Vic must do is try harder. All Vic must do is become a little bit more motivated. All Vic must do is stop staring out the window. And none of those things helped. Dyslexia is not a visual problem. It's not a problem with laziness. Dyslexia can't be outgrown. It is a lifetime thing. It's not caused by a parent not teaching their kids to read properly. However, dyslexia is hereditary. Dyslexia is hereditary, and so is ADHD. Yeah, you get it from your parents. It's very rare to find somebody who's dyslexic that has both parents not dyslexic. Very rare. And that's typically what can be called acquired dyslexia from a brain injury, a brain trauma. Dyslexia is not about seeing letters backwards. We see them the right way. We just don't know how to write them the right way, often. Dyslexia is not rare. Depending on which research you read, between 15 and 20% of the population are dyslexic. So it's not rare. It's very common. A lot of people are dyslexic. And dyslexia is not a problem with intelligence. Albert Einstein was dyslexic. Or it suggested that he was dyslexic. Okay, so. Oh, excuse me. How does dyslexia work in the workplace? Now, there are a load of frustrations that we feel in the workplace. Because of poor memory, it has an impact on our perception of time. How we perceive and understand time. How do we make time, or how do we be on time for the things that we need to do? But more importantly than just being on time for things, how do we allocate time to get things done? You'll find that people with dyslexia, same with ADHD, because of that lack of time awareness, often underestimate the amount of time it will take to get something done and overestimate the ability to do things in that time. Okay? You notice I've just put my glasses on. And the reason why I put my glasses on is because most people with dyslexia do have vision issues. So I've got what's called an astigmatism. So most people with dyslexia do wear glasses. It just makes it easier to read or see far distances. Communication skills with dyslexia is an issue. So if you've got dyslexia, work hard on learning to communicate well. It's not a natural skill that we have. Anxiety and frustration can rise. A lack of awareness. People who are dyslexic are some of the most unaware people. Unaware of how our dyslexia impacts other people. Unaware of what other people are saying and how they are trying to say it. So there's a lot of awareness that we need to work on to make, or a lot of effort must go into making us more aware. And then, of course, there are other things like reading, writing, and spelling, which can lead to a lot of frustration in the workplace. Okay, so some common strengths, and I've just put this slide in here to show that there are ways in which we do bring strengths to the workplace, and there's ways in which the workplace can be set up to accommodate people with dyslexia. So strengths that dyslexic people have, very, very big on problem solving. Very big on problem solving. Very big on the big picture views and visions, creative visual thinking, very, very orientated towards teamwork, empathy, not just teamwork. Empathy is a key word for people with dyslexia. We don't just sympathize, we empathize. We actually feel the group's vibe. And so we're very good at making that work. People with dyslexia are also very good at formulating top-end, workable, effective strategies. And we tend to go from problem to solution very quickly, but miss all the steps in between, because we can see the solution, how to get to the solution. That's not our problem, because that's the big picture thinking. So if you've got somebody, or if you are dyslexic, recognize that you'll understand the problem. You'll see the solution before anybody else gets there, because you don't have to follow the path. You leave that up to somebody else to connect the dots. Creating a workplace environment, and I would encourage you, if you are dyslexic and you are going into the workplace, look for some of these things in that workplace. Do they have an open communication structure where it's easy to take the time to communicate or to speak things out so that people get the understanding of what you're trying to say? Because we are naturally oversharers. Because we're oversharers, it takes us a long time to explain what we're trying to say. So an open communication environment is good for that. Mind maps. If you're working in an environment where they allow you to mind map something out, that's really helpful for that. And noise can be a major, major challenge for people with dyslexia. It becomes very distracting. And so if you have a quiet workspace, it's very, very good. So these are just some of the things that will help you. And that slide's up there. You can pick it all up from that. Let's talk about ADHD. ADHD is probably one of the most misnamed conditions. ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Number one, we are not attention deficit. We don't have a deficiency in attention. What we have is a lack of the ability to understand what is the most important thing to attend to. So it should be attention overwhelm. To explain it, it's almost like sitting in a movie house or theater, a movie theater, and you've got 1,000 screens in front of you. Each one is playing a different movie, and you are sitting in a chair trying to decide which one you want to watch. And the moment you decide on the one you want to watch, they all change. That's what it's like inside somebody with ADHD's brain. Okay? And that happens constantly. It's said that the average person will have between 80 and 100,000 thoughts a day. Somebody with ADHD, we have that before breakfast. Also, not everybody with ADHD is hyperactive. I'm not hyperactive. I have hyperactive moments, but I don't consider myself hyperactive. The reason why I put that picture in the screen there is because I love skateboarding. People say at my age I shouldn't. Why? Why shouldn't I? But that's also got another important component to it, that picture. People with ADHD are risk takers. We will take risks that people say, don't do it. And we'll go, what's the worst that can happen? And we'll take the risk. So when you look at people with ADHD, be aware of their risk taking. We don't have a deficit in terms of our attention. We have an overwhelm. There's too much and we don't know what to decide on doing. So what is ADHD? ADHD, some people have said ADHD is a superpower, and we have the ability to do things other people don't. I say, yes, it is a superpower, but it's a superpower that comes with major, major consequences. ADHD people are good problem solvers, generally pretty stable, visual learners, very witty. We think we're the funniest people on earth. Some of us are not, but we do love a good laugh. And with that comes courage. Now, courage, some people would think courage is the guy that runs into a door with a gun knowing that there's 10 other people on the other side that are going to shoot him. A soldier. Courage, often people think as being somebody who would jump in the ocean to go and fetch somebody that's drowning. Yes, those things are courage or courageous. However, there are other things that make ADHD people courageous. That is the ability to stand up when they've been knocked down. That takes courage. And ADHD people get knocked down all the time. So view courage from a different perspective. We also have unlimited energy. People with ADHD just seem never to stop. Most people with ADHD love to talk. Not all, but most of us do. We have a very high opinion of our understanding of things. Anyway, we're pretty helpful, passionate, persistent, creative, imaginative. All these words describe people with ADHD. Again, big picture thinkers. However, there are major downsides to ADHD. Things like masking, RSD, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. That hyperactive thing, a lot of people are hyperactive that are ADHD, and that can cause a lot of problems, a destruction of energy, and so on. Lots of tiredness and those sorts of things. Working memory is a problem for people with ADHD. Now, you think somebody with dyslexia and ADHD has a problem with working memory, also short-term memory, and there's a difference between the two. Working memory is that memory you need while, like, for example, I'm talking now. It's my brain working with what I'm doing. What am I going to say next? What do I need? What is somebody else just said to me that I then need to push into short-term memory and to retain it for a short period of time and eventually to long-term memory. Working memory is a big problem. You'll often find somebody with ADHD, you'll be talking to them and suddenly they can't remember what they were saying. They get distracted very easily and they can't remember where they were. And yeah, I've got a very good friend. When her and I get together, we can sit and talk for an hour. We can go through 1,000 different subjects and not remember one of them. Never come to a conclusion on any of them. And we just, yeah, it's just life. People with ADHD often struggle with anger management, how to manage their frustration and their anger. There's two sides to deadlines. Most of us with ADHD work well under pressure. So give us a deadline and give us 3 weeks. We'll do everything that needs to be done in those 3 weeks in the last 24 hours before the end of the deadline. So if you want somebody with ADHD to get stuff done, give them very short-term deadlines with small things to do at small in those deadline periods. So the way I often suggest you do that is you take the big picture, whatever it is that you want done. Let's say, for example, you're an architect and you need to design a building. Okay, so break that back down to its smallest component. First, I need to design a window. Right, so you need to design a window. You need to design that window in the next 6 hours. So you've given a short-term deadline for a small thing to be done. But that small thing added to all the other small things is going to create the big thing, which is something that works really, really well. we do struggle with exhaustion. And the reason for that is the overwhelm within our brains that sucks so much energy out of us. It is draining. It's exhausting. And many people with ADHD suffer from a thing in their legs called restless leg syndrome, where they become so tired, their legs jerk, they make involuntary movements, and it can be a huge thing. Exhaustion can require people, depending on their age, to need to just take a whole week out and stay in bed. I've seen it happen. But consequent to that exhaustion, if people keep pushing through and don't take the time to relax they need, can result in burnout. And that's one of what we call an ADHD tax. People with ADHD are easily distracted. Busy sitting in your office, you're typing away, you look out the window, there's a bird, and the bird becomes your full focus. And then suddenly there's a squirrel. The squirrel becomes your full focus. Then somebody walks in and goes, hi, and their weekend becomes your full focus, even though it's Thursday. And while you focused on their weekend, an email pops up, and suddenly that email becomes your full focus, and you completely forget about that person that was there. And while you're reading that email, you see a spider crawling across. Oh, that spider becomes really interesting. And so we become easily distracted, which means that things that we're supposed to do take so much longer to do. One of the biggest things that people with ADHD do, and this results in a huge amount of energy suck out of our lives, is what's called ADHD masking. We mask so that we don't look like idiots, so that we don't look like fools, so that we don't look deficient in any way. And we try desperately to keep up with everybody around us. We try to appear to be more organized, where most ADHD people are disorganized. But internally, so externally we look super organized, internally there's utter chaos going on. We make a conscious effort to sit still, but we can't. No person with ADHD can sit still. I mean, I'm standing here, my hands are going, my legs are going, my brain's going. We can't sit still. So please, if you've got a kid that's got ADHD, please don't try and tell them to sit still. It's the worst thing you can do for them. Get them something to fidget with. We take this attitude of, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. So that we can kind of mask over that sense of rejection. And if you've got RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, it's an explosion of the sense of feeling rejected. And it can cause major, major, major damage. I've just recently had to go and take a friend of mine off one of the cliffs down the coast. His wife had said something absolutely arbitrary. His brain went into rejection mode, and he decided he was going to end it all just purely because of something she said. So yeah, it's RSD is a huge thing. But there's a whole lot of other things that masking causes. And you can stop masking. I've managed to work through a lot of those things. For example, you can rehearse in your mind a conversation so that you can make sure you're saying the right things in the right way, so that you can get the feeling of confidence. You can learn to take those things that people have said, put them aside, leave them there, carry on, and allow them just to dissipate. You can learn all of those things. And so, you can go through all that process. ADHD burnout is a massive, massive problem. Most of us run on an empty battery all the time. And sometimes that battery just dies. And when it dies, that's burnout. You feel like you should be able to do more, but you can't. You feel like you should get stuff done, You feel like there's no motivation. You feel extra exhausted just going into a place where there's people and you've got to try and socialize. These are all big problems that lead to ADHD burnout. Be careful, watch out for it. It'll bite you in the rear end. Now, there are differences in ADHD. That's not true with dyslexia, but with ADHD, there are big, big differences between men and women. And I'm just going to leave that up on the screen for a few minutes. But men with ADHD tend to be more impulsive. Women tend to spend more. Men tend to have less ability to regulate their emotions. RSD being a part of that. Also, a difficulty with regulating moods. Women with ADHD tend to be hyper talkative and daydream. So there are differences, and those differences can make a massive difference in the way in which other people see our ADHD. So here's 12 tasks that people with ADHD find difficult to do or to facilitate. Regulating emotions. Across the board, men and women, but men tend to struggle with it way more. Prioritizing tasks. Starting and finishing things. Oh my word. Come to my house. There are projects all over the place that I've started. Some of them 12, 15, 20 years old, never finished. And when my wife says, please finish this thing, I'll go, yes, one day. When I moved from one country to another, a lot of those projects came with me, and my wife asked why. I said, because one day I'll finish them. 15 years later, I haven't. Scheduling appointments. Now, that's one thing that I've learned. If I don't put an appointment in my diary, I completely forget it. So put it in, utilize tools to help you doing that. Memorizing information. You know, there was a time when I knew everybody's mobile number or the phone number, home phone number, because we didn't have mobiles back in those days. But I could not remember my own. It's really interesting. So, yeah. Also, sleep. Sleep is a huge challenge for people with ADHD. But there are positives. Strong sense of what is fair. Strong sense of justice, what's right and what's wrong. Always willing to help others, even to our own detriment. Able to see the big picture. Make people feel heard. Not afraid to take risks. Extremely passionate. Big thinking, big dreams, big dream. You'll find a lot of the motivational speakers from the past that always said, have big, hairy dreams. Have all these, they came out with lots of acronyms, but always big dreams. You'll find that most of those guys were ADHD because they think like that. High energy, lots of fun to be around, but also drop very quickly. Just remember, people with ADHD stim a lot. Stimming is just something that you do to distract yourself. It could be verbal, it could be visual, it could be something that you do with your hands. You'll often find people with ADHD will sit in a room and they'll tap. And somebody will say, stop tapping, or stop moving your legs. That's just a stim. Just understand what it is and where it comes from. Now, there's a connection between dyslexia, between ADHD and autism, and they often are found together. About 40% of people with ADHD also are autistic, and they become a problem, particularly in social areas, when there's a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding social cues. And these things often lead to overanalyzing. So there's a connection between the two. So what is ASD? ASD is not a disease, and it's not an illness. It's not something you can catch, but it is a spectrum. If you're autistic for life. It's a condition of your brain. Autism presents itself in so many different ways. You get people who are nonverbal. You get people that are very low on the spectrum, but they struggle to communicate and interact with other people. They may be high on the spectrum and are called high functioning autism. Some people with autism don't understand information very well. Again, back to a friend of mine, she struggles to understand information that other people pick up very, very quickly. So her and I'll often sit down and I'll take my time and go through stuff with her so that she understands it. Autism has got to do with the brain structure. And again, like dyslexia and ADHD, it's an evolutionary purpose. But what we see is not everything that's part of autism. Again, the same as dyslexia and ADHD. There's a major decrease in working memory with people that have autism. So you may have a reduced working memory as somebody with ADHD, add autism to it, and that working memory just about falls through the floor. A difficulty in developing language skills is something that people with autism struggle with. Difficulty in making decisions is a big challenge for people with autism. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these huge details because there are so many of them, and I could talk about this stuff for the next 5 hours, which would not be very good for us because they need this room shortly. But a lot of these things overlap with autism and ADHD. Stimming, burning out, executive dysfunction, hyperfixation, emotional dysregulation, and so on. I'm going to go, but autistic people do bring some really, really amazing strengths to the workplace and to the world. Visual skills, attention to detail, creativity, integrity, expertise, long-term memory. People with autism, man, they say an elephant's got a long memory. Yeah, give it to an autistic person. They'll remember the exact words 30, 40 years down the road. They just never seem to forget. But the working memory, not happening. So there's lots of strengths, but there's lots of weaknesses and challenges as well. But it's important to know that if you do have autism, that the world has changed to the place where those things are accepted within the workspace. And many companies are changing in such a way that they appreciate and understand and work with people who are autistic. And it's important to create a culture or work with a company that creates a culture that recruits, promotes, and retains people that have these very, very exceptional skills, just a slightly different way of delivering them. And I think the big thing here that I want to encourage you to take away from here is to think about dyslexia, ADHD, and autism and neurodiversity as a whole differently. That's reframing your mindset towards these things. If you have those conditions, change your habits. Work on creating a life of habits that works with your brain instead of against your brain. And then rebuilding people. You rebuild yourself as you change your perception, your perspective, and your understanding by doing further research, by changing the way you act, by doing the things differently that need to be done. And I think that's the important thing here. So these are the questions I've tried to answer in a very short space of time. What is neurodiversity? What does it mean? What are the types of neurodiversity and how they're displayed? What are the challenges they present? And I think through what we've spoken about, some of the strategies to manage those techniques. And there we go. If there's any questions, happy to answer them.
So Jackie has asked, what would you say to people that argue that neurodivergent people are less employable because of all of these obstacles and considerations required to help them function?
Okay, what would I say? about the opinion that people with neurodiverse conditions are less employable because of the challenges they face. And what was the second part?
Yeah, that was it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the challenges, Jackie, I would say that the people that say that sort of stuff are uninformed or ill-informed. And the reason why I say they're ill-informed is because we know now so much more about these conditions. We know about the strengths that people bring. We also understand those challenges. We also understand the mitigating factors that can be applied. So, for example, a person with dyslexia could use a platform like Grammarly to solve their spelling and grammatical challenges. Could use voice to text software like Dragon Pro to write their emails. They could use the same software in a text to speech mode to have their emails read to them. So there are lots of tools available to mitigate the challenges we face. When it comes to ADHD, I work with a lot of companies that have ADHD staff, and they have created an environment in which those people thrive. So I would not say that it's a lack of employability. I would say it's more about an attitude that says, I don't want to deal with those challenges. I don't think,
Willingness to deal with those challenges on part of the employer?
On part of the employer, yeah. Yeah, on part of the employer. It's also, if you think of it from the perspective of the person with ADHD, they're going to generally be masking those conditions, and they're going to be trying extra hard not to let those conditions be a problem. Okay. So employers generally, I think the law says they're not even allowed to ask you if you have a neurodiverse condition. I always believe tell the employer. And then you fall under the legal obligation of the employer having to make what's called reasonable adjustments. But before you get to that stage, I think people with these conditions should change their mindsets. Not to see themselves as unemployable, but to see the things that they bring to the workspace as making them more employable. So, for example, somebody with ADHD, their ability to see beyond the dimensions of the box should make them more employable because they can come up with different strategies, they can come up with different ideas, different perspectives.
That's where the innovation happens, right?
That's where the innovation happens. Absolutely. So I think it's got to start with a change in mindset from our perspective, because the mindset is already changing in the workspace.
Yeah.
And a lot of employers, in fact, there was an article a few years back where NASA is particularly looking to employ people who are ADHD and dyslexic because of that out of the box thinking, because of that big picture thinking, and that ability to create things. So I would say you got to approach it from two perspectives. If a recruiter, and this is often where the challenge lies, is in the recruitment space. Because with dyslexia, I hate filling out forms. ADHD, my ADHD said, oh, start filling out the form. I'm bored now. Had enough. The recruitment industry needs to change their attitude and their perspective to making the recruitment process ADHD, dyslexia, autism friendly so that we can apply for the jobs that are available. Then that will change attitudes a lot faster. So, Jackie, I hope it is Jackie, am I right?
It is.
Okay. I hope, Jackie, that has answered your question to a degree. But yeah, I think it's all about the changing of attitude and perspective, primarily from our point of view. Yeah. There we go. Thanks. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share all this. Let's rock and roll.
That's brilliant, as always. Thank you, Vic. We've got some thank yous coming in on the chat here as well. So
cool.
Everyone's very much enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Excellent.